Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter. I am a curator in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies and the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. The SIMS, as we call it, is part of the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts. And I am really happy today to have my colleague Jeff Pierce here. Jeff is what is your title?
South Asian Studies Librarian and Assistant Director of the Zilberman Center for Global Collections.
Excellent. I won't repeat that, but you all heard that. And Jeff is going to walk us through some Sanskrit manuscripts. We haven't looked at a lot of Sanskrit before. I actually don't know if we've looked at any Sanskrit before because I feel totally inadequate in being able to explain anything about them except the very basics. And so I'm really thrilled to have Jeff here to show us some really cool manuscripts. So I'm just going to pass it on to Jeff.
Thanks, Dot. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session of what I'm going to call today Coffee with a Poti, but that doesn't have quite the same ring to it as Coffee with a Codex. We're going to be focusing today on this nice little Jain manuscript composed in Prakrit and Sanskrit, coming from Western India. As Dot said, my name is Jeff Pierce. I'm the South Asian Studies Librarian, so I'm responsible for curating our South Asia collection and offering research support for South Asian Studies, and I'm also the Assistant Director of our Zilberman Center for Global Collections here in the libraries. I want to offer a couple of caveats before digging in that my own background is in goddess narrative traditions of South Asia. I'm a user of manuscripts and a dabbler, but I'm not an expert in manuscript histories, and also not an expert in Jain religious literature. But I wanted to pull out this manuscript because it's such a gem, and wanted to kind of have this opportunity to explore it together. This is a version of the Kalakacharya Katha. This is a well-known legend that becomes somewhat canonical in the Shvetambara Jain tradition. This particular manuscript, as I said, is coming from Western India. The date is a little bit fudgy. When this was cataloged a number of years back, the cataloger assigned a date of sometime in the 18th century. Prominent scholar who we'll discuss in a moment dated it when he was working on it to the latter half of the 15th century. Based on some of the readings I've been doing about these artistic styles, I lean towards that earlier date, but I'll leave it to the experts to hash that out. So there is quite a window of when this manuscript might have been produced. There's no date on the manuscript itself. Penn is known for its South Asian manuscript collection, numbering about 3,000 manuscripts. It's the largest of its kind in the Americas. The vast majority of these manuscripts were acquired in the first half of the 1930s. These were acquisitions that were coordinated by Professor W. Norman Brown and his colleague in the city of Varanasi in India, Narayana Shastri Kiste. Brown was really a powerhouse of Sanskrit studies, but also South Asia studies more broadly. He really advocated for expanding the reach of South Asia studies beyond classical Indology. He founded the first South Asia Studies department here at the University of Pennsylvania in 1947. He was really influential globally in establishing the American Institute of Indian Studies, which remains really influential for anyone studying South Asia in the US. And also very formative in the development of the PL 480 program, which brought really millions of books from India to research libraries in the US in the latter half of the 20th century. And all of that is notable context because this particular manuscript of the Kalakacharya Katha comes from Brown's own personal collection. He purchased this manuscript in 1922 when he was staying in the city of Varanasi, and someone just showed up at his door one morning with this beautiful manuscript kind of bundled up and asking if Brown wanted to purchase it, which he very quickly did. And that's kind of notable because, as he calls it, it is quite a jewel. So just flipping through very briefly, it's clear that it's a very rich manuscript. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to look at. There's a lot to dig into. Brown did then set this manuscript aside for a number of years in his collection, but eventually it did become the subject of a research project and really foundational for a publication that he put out, The Story of Kalika, Texts, Histories, Legends, and Miniature Paintings of the Shvetambara Jain Hagiographical Work. It's quite a tome. I would suggest browsing through it. It's a great text. This legend, the Kalikacharya Katha, the story Katha of the master or teacher, Acharya Kalika, relays stories of the renowned monk Kalika. It provides some overview of Jain principles of righteousness and nonviolence, and it offers explanation for the timing of the Paryushan festival, which is a time of fasting and prayer. For Jains, for the Shvetambara Jains, it lasts for 8 days in the months of in the months of August or September, depending on the lunar calendar. For many years, these stories circulated orally and began to be committed to writing in the first part of the second millennium. But they continued to circulate orally even as these were written down and became part of a manuscript tradition. So because of this history of orality, there really is no authoritative archetype of this literature. It's sort of a grouping of tales. Brown classifies the version we have in this particular manuscript as the long anonymous version. When he did his studies back in the late 20s and 30s, he sort of grouped manuscripts into these different versions, and this one is the long anonymous version, which does have sort of a general arc, but does have variations from text to text, from manuscript to manuscript.
So can I interrupt with,
Yeah,
with
of
a
course.
question? So in Western manuscripts, there is this very common thing where like manuscripts are copied from other manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same here? Like, would this have been copied from not one of these anonymous versions, or is there a lot of like the scribe sort of putting themselves into the text that they're writing down?
So there's both going on. There was a push in the, say, 15th century, 15th, 16th, 14th, 15th century to develop new Jain manuscripts, and so there is a time of production and newness, and then there definitely is a tradition just overall of reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
The environment in South Asia is generally not conducive to long-term preservation of manuscripts, so there's a lot of reproduction, and maybe that's what we have here, that this was just recreating an original manuscript. I'm a little bit hesitant to say that because of the specifics of sort of the artistry of these miniatures. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm not an expert in that, so I'll leave it to the experts. But
Right.
So I can't say for sure whether this was a recreation or an original production.
Okay. And for the folks on Zoom, I just want to say that we are going to take a closer look at the miniatures in a little bit, so we're not missing anything. We'll look at them
Yeah. Sorry, I
closely.
just wanted to give
We're
this
giving
kind
that
of
overview
flipping
right
through
now.
as
Yeah,
I'm giving
yeah.
some context, and then we'll dig in. Actually, before we dig into the Kalika further, though, I do want to digress a little bit and turn to a supplemental manuscript, actually 2 supplemental manuscripts, just to offer a little bit of context about manuscript formats and conventions in South Asia.
I'm excited about this.
For those who might not be very familiar. So prior to around the 14th century, when the use of paper became more commonplace in the region, manuscripts were primarily composed on palm leaf or sometimes birch bark. And the physical nature of that palm leaf really dictated some facets of the manuscript production. And that continued to persist even with the shift to paper and what's called the poti format. So here we have a nice little palm leaf manuscript. It's quite miniature, actually, but really interesting. The leaves here have been trimmed. So with the palm leaf manuscript production, the leaves would be harvested, boiled, dried, cut, polished, and pressed in preparation for use. So you can see that these have been trimmed. If you get in a little more closely, you can see sort of the grooves of the leaf. So the sort of materiality of that leafness.
Why don't you push it up a little bit more? There we go. Yeah, there you go.
Super. Then once those leaves are prepared, traditionally a stylus would be used to inscribe the content into the leaf, and then some kind of pigment applied across the leaf, settling into those grooves. The excess pigment removed from the surface, leaving just that color in the incised grooves. And then a hole is punched in the center so that the leaves could be threaded together, and then wooden boards generally added to either end for protection. So I really don't want to go into the weeds with this manuscript, but just wanted to show kind of an example of that more traditional palm leaf manuscript production. This manuscript itself is really, I mean, it could have a whole session itself just because of how rich it is. This is coming from the region of Odisha along the eastern coast of India, south of Bengal. It is a text featuring the avatars of Vishnu and praises to these avatars of Vishnu, composed in Sanskrit in the Odia script. A lot of illustrations in this one, which is interesting. We start with this illustration of Ganesha, which the invocation of Ganesha is common in this tradition as the god who is the remover of obstacles. So we have Ganesha, then we have the inscribed text, again the Odia script, and this ornamentation on the sides, which isn't always usual, but we do see that in the Kalakacharya Katha we have as well. Different incarnations here. We also see some paint applied in this one, so we have the blue and the red paint that's been applied on top of the inscribed portions. We have the avatar of the Narasimha, the man lion, on this side, destroying the demon Hiranyakashipu, the avatar of the boar avatar on the other side. So a really fascinating manuscript. As we shift into paper use, however, this kind of format is retained, and some of these vestigial elements remain. And I just want to briefly turn to this other Jain manuscript to show that this structure is kept. Let me zoom out. So we have now this same kind of oblong, this long, narrow feature, sort of reminiscent of that palm leaf, and then really interesting, retaining that central element where the hole would have been punched in the palm leaf. That punching of the hole and threading is not retained for paper manuscripts, but the space for the hole is sometimes retained, as we have here. Sometimes it's left blank and the text is around it, and in some instances we have this ornamentation that's really calling back to that hole.
So there was a comment in the comments area in the chat about how the script on the palm leaf is more curved because of the grooves in the palm leaf. So, and I'm noticing it, I hadn't noticed it before, but here it's a lot more straight because paper is flat. And so that's sort of an interesting thing to note. I think that like they were writing in a particular way on the palm leaf because of the way the palm leaf is as a surface versus the paper.
Yeah, and that there are arguments about the development of scripts, sort of that palm leaf influencing development of scripts across South Asia. Palm leaf continues to be more prevalent in South India, and those scripts tend to be a little bit more loopy than the Nagari scripts that we see in the north that develop, and we'll talk a little bit more about scripts in a moment. But yeah, there is this kind of difference, and you can make an argument that it's due to the nature of the format, the media.
Yeah.
So.
And someone is asking, without the hole, how were they bound? Were they bound, or did they?
They were not bound. Sometimes there's the wooden block, as there is with palm leaf, not always. They were usually wrapped in cloth, often red cloth, sometimes a saffron color cloth, and stored that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I want to jump back to the Kalakacharya Katha, and again we see this one is also reminiscent of that kind of palm leaf. It's got that decorative element in the center there. So it's retaining some of these conventions, and this again becomes kind of a standard. This poti format is pretty standard. That long, narrow format that remains. This manuscript is a little, I don't want to say unusual, but it's not the norm that manuscripts are illustrated or illuminated. So, for example, the vast majority of the manuscripts that we have here in our collection at Penn are kind of black ink on plain paper. Not a lot of illumination, not a lot of illustration. But as you can see, this manuscript is very ornate. And this becomes a relatively common feature within this corpus of text, within these Jain texts. And this is a very intentional decision of production that's intended to be showy, intended to be ornate, increase expense, increase time, efforts, and all of this meant to accrue religious merit, to create an object that not only transmits knowledge, but also becomes an object of veneration itself. So kind of a different approach to the manuscript itself. Each leaf of this manuscript has these two sides, separated into these two sides with on either side of that central embellishment. Most are, they're separated into these two text blocks. Most of those text blocks are painted with red. Some are painted with black or a light blue, and then a few of them are left plain. The text is then added on top of that wash in gold ink, so again, very rich, very ornate. And then we have those 7 miniature paintings on there. All of them are on the far right side of the leaf in a separate delineated block. In general, there were 2 people involved in the production of the work. So it starts with the scribe who would block out the structure of the manuscript and who copied the text, and then an artist that would go back in and add the miniature paintings. So we can see, for example, the red, there's like a red mark. Just zoom in a little.
Oh, yeah.
So like some red markings that are kind of delineating the rough structure. It's a little more difficult to see for the paintings, but some of them you can see where that red line is still visible, even with the paint kind of applied next to it or on top of it. And then the scribe would go in and add that text. As I said previously, the text here is mostly Prakrit. This is a version of Prakrit that Brown identifies as Jaina Maharashtri Prakrit, and there's some Sanskrit included. For those of you not familiar, Prakrit is a language that's very closely related to Sanskrit. It's a literary language that one might argue is in a different register, a register that might be conceived as being between Sanskrit and the vernaculars, and it's sort of a register that becomes standard for the Jain corpus of literature.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Mm-hmm.
There's a question about the background colors. Did the different background colors of the text blocks follow some kind of rules or indicate something for the reader?
I'm not sure about that. That's an interesting question. I am not seeing patterns from my working with this text, but I'm kind of dabbling. I can't make sense of sort of it does seem to be kind of all over the place. And again, it's mostly red, but then there are these variations, and I can't tell if it's strictly artistic or if there might be something deeper underlying that.
Yeah, it could just be aesthetic. It looks pretty.
Yeah.
It looks nice.
We have this Prakrit and Sanskrit text. It's a mixture of prose and verse, and then there's, as is common for Sanskrit and Prakrit texts, there's not really word breaks. It's mostly just straight through. You do see breaks at the end of sentences or the end of verses that are marked by the danda or the period. Let's see where I can find that line. Okay, so the very last figure here, let's see if I can, here is that line. That's really the only kinds of separations we're getting. And then the text is reading across the break. So reading like this across that break. The script, zoom back out. The script is identified as Jaina Nagari. This is a version of the Nagari scripts that are found across northern India. I'm not terribly familiar with this Nagari script, but it's reminiscent of, well, it shares a lot of features with the Devanagari, modern Devanagari, with some aspects that recall Eastern Nagari that's used for Bengali and Assamese. So, things that look very familiar. So you have Jambudvipa, for example. This is in the land of Jambudvipa. The Jambu looks fine to me. The Deep, the A sound would be a flag in Devanagari. Instead it's a line in front of the Va, like you would see in Bengali. So kind of an interesting feature there. Let's see. So then the artist would move on, and we need to dig into these paintings because we're already 20 minutes into this thing.
And it goes really quickly.
I know,
like
the
it's
time is flying
shocking
by.
how quickly it goes.
So the Kalakacharya Katha, as I said previously, has 4 primary narrative episodes. The text begins with the longest episode, and so 4 of the illustrations involve that episode. It begins with the Kalaka, who is a prince, out and about, and he comes across this group of Jain monks, listens to them, is really moved by them, and decides he wants to join them. He converts to Jainism, and then he asks his parents, the king and queen, if he can become a monk, and that's what we see here in the first illustration. A few interesting things to note here. So here we have Kalaka in the center. We have the king on the left and the queen on the right. We see, the dress seated on thrones, the sort of parasol at the top and this parasol are very indicative of the royal status. One thing I want to point out is this treatment of the faces, which is very specific to this Western Indian style. The faces are quite angular, and they're usually in this kind of 3/4 profile, and that further eye, it kind of extends beyond the line of the face. And that's kind of a very fundamental feature of this style, and it really stands out. Some of those eyes will be more prominent than others. Some of them kind of like extend into space, and this becomes even increasingly underscored when compared with some of the other figures who are not of South Asian descent, and we'll see that in just a moment. The Shvetambara Jains are known for their white robes. That's what Shvetambara literally means, like white garbed. Interestingly, the robes here are not painted white totally. We'll see in examples where it's white dots, and in a couple of instances, red dots. So this, Kalaka is becoming a monk, but he's got these red dotted robes. So Kalaka becomes this accomplished monk. He takes on the leadership of a large group of monks, and they travel to the city of Ujjain, which is sort of central, west central India. And they come across this evil king, Gardabila, and Gardabila kidnaps one of the nuns, is lustful for her, and Kalaka wants to find a way to defeat him. So he goes wandering. He crosses over the Indus River on the far west of India and comes across the Shaka people, who are sort of coming from Persia, and convinces them to leave their region and move to Ujjain and sort of defeat Gardabila. They complain they don't have enough money to do this, so Kalaka turns a pile of bricks into gold, and that's what we see here. So we have Kalaka. Here we do have that monk's robe, the dots of white indicating. We see Kalaka's broom. Jain monks carry a broom to kind of sweep in front of them so they don't harm creatures when they're walking. We see the pile of bricks here, sprinkling magic powder over the bricks, turning them to gold, and here we see the figure carrying gold blocks away. Here, the Shaka people, they're not of South Asian descent. They're coming from outside, and so they're portrayed a little differently. Their dress is different. We have this kind of like longer tunic-looking style. The decorative elements are different, and really underscoring the different treatment of the faces there. The faces are sort of full frontal. You don't have that protruding eye. that you see with Kalika, who's in that 3/4, and it does have that kind of protruding eye. We have a parasol down here. This figure is carrying a parasol for this figure on the horse. The shakas are associated with horses. That parasol, again, indicating that royal nature. The shakas do go to Ujjain and enter into battle with Gardabilla, and they're being quite successful. And so Gardabilla retreats into his walled city. And you see he's retreated here. The city walls are here. You see the central gate with towers. The kidnapped Saraswati is up here. And Gardabilla is engaged in magic. He has this trick. He has a magic donkey that when the donkey brays, anyone within hearing distance, any enemy within hearing distance falls dead. So the shakas, most of the shakas move away. They're at a distance where they're out of like earshot, except for a few sharpshooters that Kalika brings with him. So here you see the donkey that's ready to start braying, and the sharpshooters out here. Again, the shakas here are delineated by this different type of dress, the facial, kind of facial structure, the bow there and the arrow, so those are the sharpshooters, and then Kalika down here on the horse. And ready to shoot. And they are shooting at the donkey, filling its mouth with arrows before it can issue a sound, and so that allows them to then overtake Gardabilla and capture him. And that's what we see in the next illustration. We have a shaka bringing Gardabilla to Kalika, now sort of enthroned, and we see Gardabilla being held by the hair, his hands shackled. Kalika kind of preaches to him, tries to get Gardabilla to show remorse. Gardabilla refuses, and so Kalika exiles him to wander through the land, a metaphor for wandering through samsara, or sort of the cyclic existence. We are out of time, almost, and so there are more illustrations, and I would dig more into the episodes, but are there questions that I can answer in the last couple minutes?
Yeah, any more questions? Let me see if I think at the very beginning, someone was asking if you knew exactly where this manuscript was written in terms of the part of the country or the specific area.
I don't know a very specific place. So yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
Let's see. Oops. All right. Would you say that the uneven column width is specifically done to accommodate the illustrations? I think that means in terms of like the.
I can't say for sure, but I think so. I think it's decided to have this kind of block as the painting block, and then so you have just this little bit left for a text block, and that also then has this unevenness. This isn't exactly central. This block is wider than this one.
Than that one. Yeah.
So I think allowing for some amount of text on either side of that decorative element.
Yeah. Charlotte's asking, does this manuscript have wooden boards attached? There's no boards. It would have been, I think you said, probably wrapped in cloth originally. We keep them in little folders like this on a shelf.
And we don't have many of those wrappings in our collection, but we have a couple that were retained. Like we actually received them in that original wrapping. History material text last week before last, Sylvia Hoteling talked about that very thing. So.
Yeah. And then one last question. Did South Asia know about the standard, I think, like codex form of the manuscript? Like, are there codices? I know that we have one manuscript that the Ragdarshan, I don't know if you know it, which is a codex, but it's also, I think, Persian.
Yeah. I can't say to what degree the codex was known, but I imagine it had to have been known to some degree, but it was not adopted until the Mughal period, so starting like 16th-ish century.
Right. And that was when they came in and they brought it with them.
And so then you have the codex form taking root, but it's developing alongside the sort of Sanskritic traditional format of the poti. So then you have both.
Yeah. And then one last question. Charlotte asked about the pages being labeled, and I think they are. They have
Yeah, I
numbers
meant
on
to
them.
indicate that. There's a number
Yeah.
on the right lower corner, and it's each leaf is 1. So
Right.
like it's
there's the next
11,
one.
12.
Yeah, and I mentioned in the
13.
chat that before we started, Jeff noticed that they were all out of order, and so he put them in order, and that's how he was able to do it because of the
Yeah.
numbers on there.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic.
All right, thank you so
so
much. Yeah.
This was great. I'll be back in a week. Thanks everyone for coming, and this has been recorded, so it will be on YouTube pretty soon. So you can watch it again, share it with your friends.
Thanks so much. This has been great. I appreciate the invitation and get to chat about one of our great manuscripts.
Oh
So
yeah,
thanks so
maybe
much.
we'll have you back.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Bye everybody.
Bye.